Welcome to episode 32 of the Cycling Europe podcast. My name is Andrew Sykes. This episode of the podcast is probably going to break some kind of record in terms of the number of countries that are mentioned. A few weeks ago, a new book was published by Dorling Kindersley called Ride, Cycle the World, and in a few moments I'll be chatting to three people involved in its production. The conversation will be in two parts. Sandwiched in the middle of those two parts is the first of what will hopefully be a regular cycling-themed monologue. In this episode, it's been recorded by Tandem cyclist Laura Massey-Pugh, who, post-COVID, is planning to cycle around the world with her husband. But let's start with the first part of my conversation about Ride, Cycle the World. I was joined by Rachel Laidler, Tom Owen and Chris Scaife, and I started by asking them to introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Rachel Laidler. I'm one of the editors who worked on Ride, Cycle the World, which is a new book all about the world's best cycle rides, surprise, surprise, by DK Eyewitness. And it's no surprise to hear, I suppose, I am also a keen cyclist. So I started off cycling, commuting to and from work in London a couple of years ago. And from there, my love of cycling has grown. So yeah, now I'm testing out my skills and punishing myself in the Scottish Highlands, which is fun.
My name's Tom Owen. I'm a writer, and I have been working in cycling for about 7 years now. I, like Rachel, got involved in cycling through commuting to work and just absolutely fell in love with it. And then within a very short amount of time, started going on trips, trying to take my bike and go on an adventure. And have been doing that, pretty much ever since.
Hi, I'm Chris Scaife. I'm an outdoor writer and I live in Kendal, which is just on the edge of the English Lake District. I write about walking, caving and wildlife as well as cycling. Where I live is a really good area for cycling, and I tend to spend a lot of time in the hills nearby, going on multi-day cycling trips as well. And I've done quite a bit of cycling abroad. It's something I've always done, really. I wouldn't say it's something that started recently. I've always been a cyclist, really.
Okay, so Chris and Tom, obviously you have contributed to some of the rides that are listed in the book that Rachel was talking about, and we'll come to talk specifically about some of those rides in a few minutes. But to kick off with, Rachel, how did the book first come about? What was the motivation for creating it?
So I think it actually started at one of our team brainstorming days, and we just thought that cycling's popularity was growing and growing. And it also helped that there were quite a few people on the team who love cycling as well. So we just suggested the idea that it might be a good book to do. And I think when we were developing it, we were trying to really we thought a lot about who the audience of the book was, who it was for. And I think it helped that there were everybody who was participating were different kind of levels of cyclists, I suppose. When we were looking at it and when we were researching it, we realized that there wasn't necessarily a single type of cyclist out there. So with the book, we really wanted to try and scoop up as many people as possible, really, and showcase that there are so many different types of ride out there, and that cycling can be for everybody. So I think, we were trying to produce something that showcased all different types of cycling.
So the book is divided up into 6 continents, and we're going to focus in a few minutes on the European one, but we might mention the other ones as well. Were there any particular criteria that you used in choosing the 100 rides that eventually made it into the book?
Yeah, so I mean, it was really, really tricky because all of our amazing authors sent in so many cool suggestions, and we ended up with this massive spreadsheet which had hundreds of rides, different rides in from around the world. And I mean, it was quite a couple of fun days trying to go through them and narrow them down. But what we were trying to look for with the rides was kind of a mixture of ones that presented a physical challenge sometimes, or that they passed through spectacular landscapes, or that they offered some sort of cultural or historical experience. And quite a few of them offer more than one of those things as well. But then obviously too, you don't want to just have a lot of rides congregated in one area of the world. So we were trying to find a good geographical spread as well as a good mixture, I think, of different route lengths and of different types of terrain. So we didn't want it to just be focused on road cycling. We wanted to include like mountain biking and like stuff on gravel as well. So yeah, it was I think it was trying to, much like with the audience, it's trying to showcase the variety of cycling routes out there.
Yeah, and there is actually a section or a few sections at the start of the book which are just general advice as to people who perhaps have never been in a long distance cycle ride before. Presumably they're aimed at the novice, but there is a lot in the book. Well, if you were a novice and tried to do the cycle along the Alps of the Balkans, I think you'd be a very brave person.
Yeah, definitely. yeah, I think that there's some of them in there. I mean, there's like one's like the I think it's the Capital Pathway in Canada, which goes through Ottawa, which is a city ride, and that's only like 9 kilometers long, so that's perfect if you're just starting out. But yeah, then there's much longer distance routes that I wouldn't. I mean, I've been cycling for a few years, but I wouldn't like to give them a go without quite a bit of training. So those are definitely more for to build yourself up to those, I think, for experts.
Just out of interest, what is the longest ride in the book?
So that's it's the Tour d'Afrique, which runs from Cairo in Egypt to Cape Town in South Africa, and I think it's like over 11,000 kilometers, I think, and it goes through something like 10 countries, I believe. An absolutely amazing ride, but it's supposed to take 4 months. So yeah, you're definitely going to be a bit saddle sore, I think, at the end of that.
Am I right in thinking, in terms of Europe, the longest ride in the book is probably, is it Land's End to John O'Groats?
You know, I'm actually not sure. I think that is one of the longest rides that we've got.
How did you come up with a list of people who were going to write about these rides? Did you just trawl the internet for people who were interested in cycling and writing about cycling?
Yeah, there's quite a lot of trawling. Yeah, no, we did quite a lot of online research, and really we're trying to look for folks who had written for different newspapers and magazines, or had written books on cycling, as well as people who had done like, you know, long distance races, or were endurance cyclists as well. But then we also wanted to include like bloggers too. So there were a couple of people who write cycling blogs who were some of our authors. But yeah, we ended up with, I think it was over 40 authors in total, which was really nice, because then again, I suppose it comes back to the variety of it, that we're trying to get as many different voices included as possible. We did our research, but we were lucky with who we got on board as well.
It kind of reads a bit like a who's who of cycling in the touring world. You've got Rob Ainsley, Ollie Broom, Emily Chappell, Lee Craigie, Laura and Tim Moss, and of course, Tom Owen and Chris Scaife, who are the two people who are joining us today. So moving to you, Tom, to begin with, how did you get involved with the project initially?
I was invited to submit some summaries, or kind of pitches, I suppose you would call them, of things that I had done that I thought could fit into rides. So they had quite a clear idea of what they wanted to do, and I think publishers done a really great job of kind of covering the whole of the world. You know, you mentioned the different continents, and so I'm lucky to have done quite a bit of cycling around the world. So one of my chapters is in Sierra Leone, and another one is in Jordan in the Middle East. But I did also pitch 3 chapters in Europe, which made it in as well, which were I suppose it's often called the most beautiful bike ride in the world. It's in Italy, and it takes a route around the Sella Ronda, which was originally created as a network of ski lifts for snow sports, but it also makes for a stunningly beautiful bike ride as well. And I also wrote about the Angleru in Spain, essentially a kind of one-day ride that you would take on a road bike and go out from Oviedo and climb the Angleru. And the third one was a lap of North Macedonia, which was perhaps the most out there, most adventurous, kind of a true touring trip. It took us 8 days to complete it, and we camped and stuff. So that's really the essence of what Cycling Europe's about, I think.
Yeah, we'll perhaps come back to probably the North Macedonian ride in a few minutes, I think, because that's probably the one that is certainly the biggest adventure of the three that you've contributed for Europe. Chris, how did you get involved?
Very similar to how Tom was involved, really, that I think this is probably what happened to all the authors. They were sent out emails asking for summaries of some rides. So I wrote a few summaries, and I've contributed 3 rides to this book. There's the Death Road in Bolivia, the Road to Kong Law Cave in Laos, and then the European one I wrote was for the, sorry, I should apologize about any Dutch pronunciations I'm going to do tonight, but the Cider Sea Route in the Netherlands, that's the European ride that I've written about, which is a 400 plus kilometer ride through quite varied landscape around the north of Holland.
Yeah, I was looking at that one earlier, actually, and I was thinking, yeah, that would be despite lockdown, that might be an actual possibility for later this summer if you can manage to get on a ferry over to the Netherlands. It's not too far away. But anyway, we'll perhaps come back to that one in a few minutes. What's your touring style, Tom?
Bike packing. I think really I'm quite late arrival to cycling and cycling culture. So just as I was getting into bikes, bike packing was becoming the fashionable thing. So I've done very few tours with kind of panniers and things like that. And mostly it's bivy bag and a grassy verge on the side of a road for me.
Chris, are you more traditional or are you like Tom?
I don't mean to sound like the dinosaur of the group, but yeah, I suppose I started cycling before anyone had used the word bike packing. So yeah, my bike has a pannier rack firmly attached. If I'm going for even a full day ride, I'll just carry a few supplies in my back pocket. But yeah, for multi-day rides, I usually take panniers. Although if there's going to be any amount of walking at either end, I will attach a rucksack onto my pannier rack.
Okay, so there are in total, I think there are 32 rides in the European section out of the 100 altogether in the book. So about a third, which is more than its fair share, I suppose, in terms of it being one of the continents. And they stretch from Helgeland in Norway right down to Greece and Minorca in the south in the Mediterranean. Rachel, have you actually cycled any of these routes yourself?
No, so I've got something to admit that I actually haven't cycled outside of Europe on my road bike, but that's something that fingers crossed it'll happen this summer. But if not, I'll stick within the UK. But I think, yeah, there are so many rides listed in the book for Europe that I would absolutely love to do. And one of them was actually the Stela one, because I've been walking in the Dolomites before. I've done quite a lot of hiking there, but I've never cycled. And my partner's done the Maratona, which is I think it's like a race there that takes in the Stela, and then there's there's like extra parts of the route involved, I think. And it looks, oh my goodness, it looks difficult. I mean, there is so much climbing there. I'm not the fastest on descending either, but I think it kind of blends two parts of cycling that I love, which is the actual challenge of doing it, the physical challenge, and then getting to be amongst beautiful scenery. And the Dolomites for me is one of the most spectacularly beautiful places in the world. I mean, the fact that you've got like these rolling green hills and forests, and then you've got these granite mountains like erupting out of them. It's just, yeah, it's spectacular. So I think that's definitely one that's very high on my list.
Tom, you actually wrote the text for that particular ride. Just looking at the profile, it's got 4 peaks approaching, well over 2,000 meters by the looks of it. Can you just briefly talk about the experience of cycling that?
It really is. It's amazing. I would recommend it to anyone. It's a physical challenge, and I think you could do any one of those passes, from your hotel and come back down again and feel like you'd achieved something that day. So to pack all 4 in, it does leave you feeling wiped, but the reward is just the scenery is astonishing, and unlike other parts of the mountains in northern Italy, it's relatively car free. If I compare that to sort of like the Stelvio, which is a little bit further away, that can get actually choked up with cars on a nice sunny day, particularly in the summer. So it lessens the enjoyment a bit. Whereas, the Sella Ronde just feels like the world is your playground. Lots of other cyclists there, but not so much motor traffic. And utterly beautiful.
Chris, the route that you wrote about in Europe was the one obviously based in the Netherlands, as you mentioned, around the Zuider Zee. Although, is it still called the Zuider Zee? It was when I was at school, because we learnt about it being built. It looks as though it's changed its name.
Yeah, the old name is the Zuider Sea, but I think that was the name when it was actually a part of the North Sea. So it used to be a tidal bay. It was a very shallow bay, but the tides were quite wild in there, I think, and people who lived beside the sea had a really tough time with the tides there. Flooding was commonplace. Since the dam has been built around the top of it, it tends to be called Lake IJssel now. So it's actually a freshwater lake now, not part of the sea anymore.
And that's in complete contrast, really, to the Sella Ronde. The Sella Ronde, you climb into, approaching 2,500 meters. Obviously, if you cycle the Zuider Zee route, it is, you're barely making any height whatsoever. Is it a relatively, I think it's a stupid question, perhaps. Is it a relatively easy ride to embark upon?
Yeah, I was just thinking about this today that, I spend most of my time riding in the big hills in the Lake District and the Yorkshire Dales. And the 3 rides I've written for this book, 2 of them are completely flat and one of them is completely downhill. So, maybe just being on holiday, I like to let my hair down. Yeah, I think the Zuider Zee route, as well as being completely flat, there are small towns and villages dotted all along the route. So accommodation options absolutely all the way around the route. You could do sort of 30, 40 kilometer days and ride this. So it's really suited to families or novices. It's also, because it's flat, you could ride huge distances in a day. So if you're wanting to test yourself, it's also a good place for that.
Going back up the mountains, Tom, you have written about the route in North Macedonia. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I was really proud of that. We took our inspiration from this website called the Spomenic Database, which has been put together by someone, I don't know who, but they've tried to catalogue every one of this enormous number of space age, Soviet era, brutalist concrete monuments, which are called spomenics. Spomenic literally just means monument, and they were erected across Yugoslavia during the period after the Second World War, before Yugoslavia collapsed. And so they're in all the countries that constituted Yugoslavia. And we wanted to focus on Macedonia, or North Macedonia as it's called now, because it's just a country that I've always wanted to go to, and it's nice and small, so you can kind of do it in a week, go a kind of lap around the entire country. And there aren't many countries in Europe where you can kind of do that. And we kind of planned a route that would connect, I think, around 12 to 15 of these spomenics, including one that isn't there anymore. So that was a fruitless kind of afternoon, searching a particular town for one that had been kind of pulled down, I think, at some point. We bike packed our way around the country. So it was fairly hilly. It's a very mountainous little country. It's not particularly high, if you see what I mean. I don't think the altitude is particularly challenging, but it's quite jagged in terms of the profile. Quite often these spomenics are on top of a hill, so that adds a little bit of extra altitude gain as well. But yeah, utterly fascinating country. It's one that when I've told people about that trip, sometimes people don't know where North Macedonia is, and I must confess that I didn't know until we started planning the trip that it shares a border with Greece. I kind of imagined it over somewhere with kind of Latvia and Lithuania. So it was a learning experience as well.
You clearly need to watch the Eurovision Song Contest a bit more frequently if you don't know where Macedonia is. So those are the rides that you've actually written about in the book. In terms of Europe, obviously there are another 29 rides, if my maths is correct, that you haven't written about. Which of those other rides are particularly appealing?
What really stood out to me when I've looked at the book is island hopping. There are some great options for island hopping, and the Faroe Islands is somewhere I've always wanted to go. If what you're really saying is you're going to send me somewhere to ride anything I want from the book, then I'll choose that one, please.
I've ringed the altitude. It's 350 kilometers and 5,600 meters of climbing. So again, quite a hilly ride.
Yeah, and steep hills as well.
How about you, Rachel? Which one sticks out for you that, yeah, I'm going to head off and do that one?
I think that the one that I don't know, because I think for me, sometimes cycling, I like the challenge of it and I like the scenery, but I quite like to do one that has more of a cultural aspect to it as well. And so the Danube cycleway, which I can't remember how long that is, but it's long. I think that follows the Danube from its source in the Black Forest all the way to Budapest. And it goes through Vienna and I think it's Bratislava and another couple of towns along the way. But you kind of get to combine with that. It's not that hilly at all, but you're getting to cycle along these absolutely beautiful waterside paths right next to the Danube, and then you can go and eat like sashatort and stuff like that in the cities as well, and drink beers. So that sounds like quite a chilled out ride that, despite its length, that I would quite like to try.
The ride of the Danube cycleway, as described in the book, is 1,200 kilometers, and it's, as you would imagine, it's downhill all the way if you do it west to east. That actually forms part of Eurovelo 6, doesn't it? Part of the much longer route that starts over in the west of France and ends up at the Black Sea. Quite an interesting route because it starts off in Germany, heads into Austria, Slovakia a little bit, and then finishes in Budapest. Back with Rachel, Tom and Chris in a few minutes. You may remember that in the last episode of the podcast, I put out a call for people to record a cycling-themed monologue that could form part of the podcast. I'm delighted to say that a few people came forward, and in the next few episodes we can look forward to cyclists talking about cycling in Czechia, Slovenia, the Netherlands and the Scottish Highlands. But to kick off the series of monologues, and following on from the interview with Rachel Marsden and Catherine Dixon in episode 30 of the podcast, Laura Massey-Pugh takes a few moments to set out her own plans to tandem cycle around the world with her husband, Steve.
Hi, my name's Laura and I'm the back half of Stela Tandem, a record-breaking attempt to cycle around the world in 2022. My front half is Stevie, my husband, and we met at a beer festival. He was drinking the beer and I was serving it. While we were there, he told me he'd cycled the length of the country from Derby to Land's End to John O'Groats and back again in 9 days, just over. I barely believed him at the time, but then he invited me to go on a tandem ride with him, and the rest is history. Since then, we've become involved in the wonderful world of Audax long-distance cycling, which you may be aware of. Events are held all over the UK and in Europe as well. We've cycled through Wales, the Pennines, Lake District, all sorts of different places on the tandem bicycle and on solo bikes, culminating in the epitome of Audax, Paris-Brest-Paris, a 1,200 kilometre bike ride from the capital city to the coast and back again. I completed this ride on my own solo bike in 92.5 hours, just outside the time limit, but an amazing achievement and certainly proof that I don't have my feet up on the back. We've also done a lot of touring. We've travelled in the south of France and climbed Ventoux, the Alpe d'Huez, with our fully laden tandem bicycle, camping along the way. On our first trip, we had a small misdemeanor with our route where the bike bus we were due to get back was not quite in the position we expected it to be. And we were left trying to ride 600 kilometres in about 30 hours. This didn't pan out so well, and it resulted in us having to reassess our options. And we sat there one cold morning thinking, how on earth are we going to get this bicycle back home? The obvious answer was to ride it. So managing to scrape a few more days together, we got on the bike and started riding north. We'd been dropped off at Narbonne on the south coast and already made it part of the way up the country, but managed to ride the rest. And a few days later, we were flying down to Calais at 5 o'clock in the morning to catch the ferry back to the UK. It was a fantastic trip, and we had so many amazing experiences along the way, meeting locals and eating the food, drinking the wine. It really imbued in us the kind of spirit of long distance cycling and touring. Last year, we were immensely lucky to be able to squeeze in a lead jog amongst the coronavirus pandemic. We averaged about 100 miles a day, camping again along the way with everything we needed on the bike. Seeing the country at the speed of a bicycle was an absolutely epic experience. And we learnt so much about ourselves along the way on that trip too. Managing to feed ourselves, fuel ourselves and keep the pedals turning all the way until we're stood at John O'Groats on the seafront. This trip inspired us and really made us think about how far can we go on this bicycle. And hearing about Tandem Wow, the two amazing ladies who came in just before lockdown, having broken the world record for the female tandem pair to cycle around the world, we were inspired and we thought, I think we can do this too. So the seed was sown and we started to look at the journey. 18,000 miles around the world, hopefully in 180 days. That will be an epic achievement. Lots of people have said, why don't you go slower? Why don't you take your time and enjoy it? But to be honest with you, I've wangled about as much time off work as I can. And one day we will go back and do it slower. But for now, it's about the challenge. It's about can we do this? A lot of people have said, why are you doing this? And I said, because we can. But Stevie has put it even better and said, because we think we can. That element of challenge is still there. We've been inspired by Mark Beaumont, Jenny Graham, Tandem Wow, all sorts of people along the way. And we want to inspire others too. We want to take people around the world with us. If people can follow us and maybe be inspired to go on trips, tours, even shorter bike rides of their own, that would be an amazing thing. So we'd really like as many people to follow us around the world as possible. We're on social media under Stela Tandem and at www.stelatandem.com. So if you'd like to find out more about our trip and maybe follow us along the road, we'd be more than happy to have you.
Thanks, Laura. If you'd like to record your own monologue for the podcast, please email podcast@cyclingeurope.org for more details. Now back to the discussion inspired by the new book, Ride, Cycle the World. In addition to Rachel, Tom and Chris, you'll also hear the voice of Jeremy Walker, who kindly agreed to read a short extract from the book.
Now, obviously, in the current climate, in terms of COVID, we're actually quite limited to where we can go in Europe. So there's plenty of places we can perhaps dream about going in, well, perhaps 2021, but probably more likely 2022 and beyond. But obviously we can go to the places in Britain, perhaps also in the Republic of Ireland. And there are 6 rides actually in the British Isles. We've mentioned the end-to-end, Land's End to John O'Groats, but there's also the Long Last Cymru. There's also the Sea to Sea. There's also a ride in the Scottish Highlands, and there's also the Antrim coast. Has anybody done any of those rides? Tom, have you done any of those British rides?
I can't say that I've done any of those exact routes in their entirety, but I think we are quite lucky that we live on a very small island that's so full of areas of amazing natural beauty. So I've done the kind of jagged up and downy, either the end or the start of Le Jog, which depending on which way you actually approach it. I can't even fathom trying to do that at the end of kind of 10 days in the saddle as you make your way towards Land's End. So perhaps that's why most people start at Land's End and work their way up.
Chris, you're based up in the Lake District, so I would imagine you spent quite a bit of time cycling in and around the Lake District and probably beyond?
Yeah, I certainly do most of my cycling in the Lake District. There are quite a few coast-to-coast routes that go quite close to where I live. So there's the sea-to-sea route, which is in the book, but there's also the Walney to Weir cycleway, which goes much closer to my house, actually, dipping my wheel in the sea at both ends, which is what is suggested in the book. The changing landscape of going across the country from coast to coast, where you go through the Lake District and then the Yorkshire Dales of the Pennines, and then across to North Yorkshire to the moors. It's a really spectacular way to see the country.
Have any of you or either of you done the Wild Atlantic Way or any part of it? In the book, it's actually referred to as Mismal, which I think refers to the 2 points at either end of Ireland that it joins up. But I think it's probably more commonly known as the Wild Atlantic Way. Have you done any of that, Tom?
At one point, it's funny you ask. At one point, I had designs on doing the bikepacking race that uses the Wild Atlantic Way for most of its course. I think it's they call it the Transatlantic Way race. I might be getting the name slightly wrong, but they begin in Dublin and they shoot directly north to pick up the Wild Atlantic Way bike route. And some of the photographs, I mean, if any of your listeners are not familiar with it, that's a great place to find some amazing photography of the coast of the Republic of Ireland. It's just utterly stunning and very kind of otherworldly, if that's not too much of a cliche, but it certainly doesn't look like something that's in our neck of the woods, if you like. It reminds me of sort of the scenery you get in Lord of the Rings, these huge imposing kind of rock forms, and then the water and the I believe the wind is the hardest part about the Transatlantic Way race. I think that's famously what the competitors struggle with most, not the distance.
Yeah, and the book actually is quite honest in terms of how it describes some of these routes in terms of, the weather, inclement weather especially, and obviously the vertical challenges that you need to confront. I'm just looking now at the Wild Atlantic Way. It starts off by saying, at times you will find this ride formidably rugged, and there will be moments when your calves scream enough, but these moments pass faster than the Atlantic coast's fleeting liquid sunshine, because beyond every bend awaits yet more of Ireland's dramatic scenery. I think reading that, it's fairly clear that you're going to get wet. There is a lot of information for each of the rides. There's maps, there's profiles. Rachel, can you just talk about how you put all that together and how you decided on the content for each of the routes that you've included?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we really wanted to do was to provide people with a kind of realistic description, as you can tell from the description of that route, of what is involved in each of the rides, but also to provide them with enough practical information to actually make their own decision on whether they'd like to do the route or not. So instead of describing routes as like easy or challenging, we've given more details on things like the total distance, the total ascent, and the road surface, so that as a reader, you're not being told this is an easy ride and you've actually never cycled before and you get on your bike and it puts you off for life. We don't want to do that to people. So we wanted to more provide enough information and context for our readers to make their own decision about it. Essentially, I think we didn't really want to be prescriptive about it. And we included the maps as just a kind of a nice way to visually represent where you're going to be going. And the elevation profiles as well, to really let you know what you're going to be in for, I think, for some of the rides. So you don't have any illusions about how much it's going to hurt.
It is a very inspirational book, isn't it? And presumably that's the aim of the book in the first place. It's not it doesn't tell you where the campsites are. It doesn't tell you where the good restaurants are. It kind of points you in the right direction of kind of, hey, why not go to the Baltic Sea, or why not go to the north coast of Scotland or wherever? But it doesn't actually weigh you down with too much detail about presumably what you're going to encounter when you get there.
The amount of practical information that we did include was to just provide that context so that you could look at it and say, actually, this is something that I'd be really interested in doing. And then from there, you can go away and actually research the nitty gritty of doing it. But yeah, the book is totally meant to be inspirational and to just show you what's out there with cycling.
I haven't counted up the number of countries that you do cover in Europe. I think there are 52 countries in altogether in Europe, and there are quite a few that you haven't got routes in. It's not an exhaustive book. I don't think you've set out to create one, but there are a couple of countries where I'm surprised that you haven't included a ride, especially Denmark. Was it quite a difficult choice, deciding which routes to keep in and which routes to keep out?
Definitely. I think especially for Europe as well, we had something like, I think it was just under 150 suggestions. And I mean, it was tricky overall globally to get the actual number of rides that we'd been suggested by our authors down to just 100, while still like covering different parts of the globe and trying to get in different sorts of experiences. So I think sometimes it was essentially we were trying to get different types of riding, and that meant sometimes that we left out certain countries. We did think about including, I think it was the North Sea cycle route in the book, but we already had quite a few long distance routes on the list, and that goes through, I think it's Denmark and Sweden. But that said, if any of our readers have any suggestions for rides that they think that we should include or we should have included, then just drop us a line via social media, because yeah, we hope to produce more outdoor focused books in the future. So it's always great to have those ideas.
So there could feasibly be a ride 2 at some point in the future, which actually brings us nicely back to Chris and Tom. So imagine Dorling Kindersley have come back to you and said, right, okay, Chris, Tom, we want some more rides in Europe. Chris, which other ride would you propose, which isn't currently in the book?
I have cycled in Denmark only day rides, not done anything that I think would have been suitable for the book. But the infrastructure in Denmark is really quite similar to the Dutch cycling infrastructure. I think that's a great place to go cycling. I was in Armenia a couple of years ago, not cycling. I don't know if you count Armenia as Europe. It's a bit of a grey area between Europe and Asia, but I think Armenia would be a fantastic place to plan some long distance bike rides. Closer to home, one ride that I would love to see in the book, in the sequel, is the Lakes and Dales Loop, which goes around the Lake District and the Yorkshire Dales along quiet roads. And it's just a great way to see what I would say are 2 of the best national parks in the country.
Yeah, I'll agree with you there. Absolutely. Certainly the Yorkshire Dales definitely should be in there. In fact, I'm almost offended that it's not in book 1. But anyway, Tom, same question. If you were asked to propose another route for Europe, which isn't in ride 1 for ride 2, which would it be?
Yeah, it's easy, isn't it, to start reeling off trips that you'd like to do. And one that has been on my to-do list for a long time, and I've never quite had the courage to go through with it, is the Camino de Santiago from the south of Spain, which is known as the Via de la Plata. And it's an old pilgrimage route to Santiago de Compostela in Galicia. I think it's about 900 kilometers, sort of plucked that figure from the air, but it's around that length. So it would take more than a week, maybe 2 weeks, maybe 3 if you want to take it really, really relaxed, depending on, I suppose, your definition of what actually makes a holiday. And that is, I think, largely off-road. At least, you can take a bike along the old pilgrimage route, and that is a broken kind of gravel track surface for a lot of it. It also runs parallel to one of the Eurovelo routes, which maybe, Andrew, you're more familiar with than I am, but I noticed when I was kind of plotting a dream route a few weeks ago to ride the Santiago Camino, that it did seem to intersect or cross over one of the Eurovelo routes quite often. So I think that you could do that a couple of different ways, and I think what it would be an amazing route for is seeing the kind of the breadth of Spain. It's really my favorite country to cycle in. You get this kind of perception of what Spain is like from media and from kind of how it's marketed as a tourist property. But once you get into kind of interior Spain, it becomes very wild, very green. Some of the largest wildernesses in Europe are in Spain because it's absolutely enormous. We forget that, I think. It's relatively depopulated. So yeah, going up through Extremadura and into Galicia, that would be my dream pitch for Rachel and her team for Ride 2.
Yeah, I think people forget that Spain is so mountainous. I think it's official. I don't know how they work this out, but I think officially it is Europe's most mountainous country. The Via de la Plata, I cycled that back in 2015 when I was cycling from Tarifa to Nordkapp in the north of Norway. And much to my shame, I abandoned it because it was very muddy, and with my bike, which is a touring bike with panniers, etc., it would have been almost impossible to continue cycling. And I followed this magnificent road called the N630, which was almost empty because they'd just built a motorway and all the traffic had gone onto the motorway, leaving me to the N630, which was this often dual carriageway with nobody apart from me and a few tractors. That's just me being a feeble, weak, pitiful cyclist who just wants an easy life.
I don't think there's any shame at all in seeking out the easiest route between 2 points. I think that's very much my philosophy when it comes to bike travel.
Oh, right. Okay. Well, I feel a bit better because of that. There is one route in Europe. I think if I was given the choice of the 32 and said, right, Andrew, go to this particular place, it would be the Baltic Sea cycle route, because this just to me sounds like heaven.
Distances here are short. It's never far to the next historic town, square or village, and there's always a good wild camping spot around the corner. You'll have most of the route to yourself, and the only sounds will be breeze, birdsong, maybe the tide, and the hum of tyres on backroad tarmac, or the gentle crunch of forest road. Meals will be Baltic style, with simple but tasty dishes of porridge, yoghurt, black bread, stews, smoked fish, foraged berries and mushrooms, perhaps washed down with a Lithuanian craft beer or Riga black balsam liqueur. And like the laid-back locals, you'll find a gentle calm in contemplating the serenity of your surroundings.
Now that to me just sums up kind of perfect cycling. Is there anything that you could add to that list which would make it even better? Chris?
I read that paragraph. It's the kind of description that just makes you want to be there, isn't it? No, I think I would feel bad asking to add anything to that because it just sounds absolutely perfect. I would absolutely love to go and do that ride, even just based on what's written there. I think it sounds like a great place to ride.
Tom?
Yeah, I can't really add to what Chris has said, but I mean, I always like to have a little swim in a lake or a river at some point during a day's touring. So if there was something I would try, and not necessarily to improve the Balkan route, because it does sound absolutely phenomenal, but yeah, generally as a rule of thumb, if you can kind of get into some water at some point each day, I think that's a good rule of thumb to go for.
We've talked mainly there about Europe. In terms of the rest of the book, I mean, you could spend the rest of your life cycling and never get through all the rides here, but there are some beautiful, amazing rides included. Rachel, which of them stand out to you?
God, there are so many in the book that I would absolutely love to do, but I think that one of the ones that really caught my eye was the Pacific Coast route in the US. So that goes from, I think it's Seattle in Washington State, all the way down through Oregon into California. I think it goes down close to the border with Mexico, and it's about 2,500 kilometers. So I think I'd need a little bit of training to get there. But it sounds absolutely stunning because it follows the coastline a lot of the way down. So you've always got, or almost always got, amazing views of the ocean. I think the Oregon coast in particular is supposed to be like particularly rugged and beautiful. And it's got all these like lovely sandy coves where you can stop off and go and have a swim if you fancy it, like Tom would like. But you also get to pedal down things like the Avenue of Giants, I think it's called, which is where some of the oldest redwoods and tallest redwoods, I think, are. So it sounds absolutely beautiful. And then there's there's this bit that goes along the coast around Big Sur, which is actually supposed to be one of the most scenic drives, I think, in the world. But yeah, you get to pedal it, and it just sounds absolutely beautiful. And then there's all the cities like Los Angeles and San Francisco that you get to visit along the way too. So it's really got a bit of everything, I think.
Yeah, and that route, I was looking at this one earlier because I was thinking, well, you could go down the Pacific coast, and actually that finishes in San Diego, and then number 13 in the book is called Southern Tier, and that goes from San Diego to St. Augustine, which is that in Florida or Georgia on the East Coast? And I thought, well, yeah, that would be a heck of a ride.
If you want to as well, you can start the ride, I think, for the Pacific coast in Vancouver in British Columbia as well. Just if you want to add on another couple of, 100,000 kilometers of cycling. But I mean, it looks absolutely stunning, the area that it goes through. It's I think it's a lot more forested up there and mountainous.
Chris, apart from the ones that you've written about yourself, which other ones stand out as kind of wow?
I think the ride that's already been mentioned earlier was Cairo to Cape Town. If you did that, that would be something you'd remember for the rest of your life. That would really be such an incredible experience.
And Tom, which was the other ride that you did, the one which was outside Europe?
I did a ride in Jordan in the Middle East, and I also did a ride in Sierra Leone. Those were really different rides in a lot of ways. I mean, the Jordan ride was just a day, whereas the Sierra Leone ride was a day by day, and we would arrive in a village at night and stay there, and that was just absolutely eye-opening in so many ways. I mean, Sierra Leone is an incredibly beautiful country. It has a really quite difficult past, immediate past, with the civil war, which lasted for around a decade, and then not long after it finished, the Ebola outbreak. So it's a country that's in recovery, and what you see everywhere you go is yes, there is a lot of poverty, but there's also this incredible wealth of human feeling, hospitality. It's a unique experience to go somewhere and be a kind of an oddity or a strangeness, and that's what you are when you're kind of riding a bike into a rural village in Sierra Leone. It's just the most bizarre thing that's happened that month, and that it takes some getting used to. But yeah, I've been to Sierra Leone a couple of times, and it just is a phenomenal place, and it has a growing cycling culture too. Football is the religion there, but cycling is slowly chipping away at that, and they've got some races there now, and stuff like that. So it's growing and it's developing, and you kind of welcomed warmly when you're on a bike.
Presumably, if you're cycling in Africa, you don't actually bump into many other cycle tourists. It's a great way of escaping the mass crowds that you might find, for example, if you go into the Alps or if you go into some of the Western European countries.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I went with a group, so we were a small group of around 10 cyclists. So we were pretty visible, and it's kind of good advice to have a support vehicle with you. So we eventually became a kind of convoy, if you like. So we were very visible, but no, we didn't see a single other cyclist. Our route was kind of recommended by one guy who had cycled a similar route himself, which he basically created, and for all we know is the first Western person to have done that route on a bike.
So we're now in 2021. We are hopefully at the end of the COVID pandemic, or getting there. So what are your plans for 2021 in terms of cycling? Chris, we'll start with you.
All right. Well, my son Oscar is 8 weeks old today. I think most of my summer plans are going to be revolving around him. I certainly intend to do some good day rides locally. My wife's parents, so Oscar's grandparents, live in northern Spain in the Cantabrian Mountains. I hope we'll be going there for a few weeks this summer, and the cycling around there is just phenomenal. So yeah, that's what I'm really hoping, but who knows?
Cantabria sounds good to me. No, I don't know if I'll make it abroad this year. In my most hopeful imaginings, I might get to do that Via de la Plata route at the end of this year. It stays pretty good, pretty nice to go cycling in Spain until October. So we got a long kind of window of opportunity. But otherwise, yeah, I'm looking forward to my girlfriend is a teacher, so I'm looking forward to the next half term, and then we're going to go back to my home, the Peak District, for a little bit of cycling around there. Hope and Edale and Castleton, names that I'm sure are familiar to you guys and to a lot of your audience. So yeah, nothing really big and expansive, I'm afraid.
Yeah, it's ironic, isn't it? I suppose cycle touring, it is by definition socially distant. I feel as though we should almost be excluded from government regulations, and we should be allowed to head off to all these different places, because if you're headed into the middle of the Alps, you can pretty easily socially distance from everybody that you come across. But hey, that's just me living in my fantasy land. Rachel, any cycling plans for the summer?
Yeah, so I think I'll actually be doing the Applecross loop that we have in the book, which goes around the west coast of Scotland. And it's got one of it seems like such a difficult climb. I'm kind of regretting signing myself up for it, but never mind. Which is the Bealach na Bar, and it's like I think it's an 8-kilometer climb up between these really rugged mountains, but it kind of winds its way up a little bit, and it's relatively okay until you get to the top, and it's like a last little kicker. You've got, I think it's switchbacks that go up to 20% gradient, so yeah, that's going to take a lot of, I think, mental strength, I think, to get up to the top there. So I'll let you guys know if I manage to do it. But then from the top, you get views over Skye. And I think on a good day, you might even get them over the Outer Hebrides as well. So yeah, you get rewarded for the effort, hopefully.
Do you think a lot of people will be heading to Scotland this summer on their bikes, because it's kind of the most easily accessible, adventurous place in Britain?
Yeah, there might be, and I think there's just so much good cycling, I think, up in Scotland. And actually, one of the reasons that I'm doing the Applecross loop is because my little brother and one of his friends are planning to do the North Coast 500 by bike. So I thought I'd go and support them. So yeah, now I'm like morally obligated to go and help him.
Before I cycled through Norway back in 2015, I decided, because I'd never cycled anywhere that was really remote or where the weather was potentially dodgy, I decided to take the bike the previous year up to the north of Scotland, and I cycled along the north coast and then down the west coast of Scotland all the way down to, I think I finished in Fort William. And yeah. I've never, it was August of 2014, and I've never experienced weather like it. It was absolutely dreadful. It was excellent preparation for then going to Norway the following year. So yeah, it's a good training ground. Just finally, Rachel, can you give us some details about how people can get hold of the book?
You can buy it at basically any retailer or online via our website, dk.com. And we've actually got quite a cool ride hub on the website there. So we've got articles about different rides in the book. You can download the different GPX routes for the rides that we feature in the book. And we've got a link to our hub on Strava, which I think is called Ride with DK Eyewitness. It keeps you up to date with different rides that people have been doing who've joined the club. And you might even see later on this year, restrictions allowing, we're hoping some of the team who worked on the book to actually do on the rides in the book together as a group, which would be quite exciting.
Yeah, well, I can thoroughly recommend the book. It is excellent, and it's very well written. There are some beautiful photographs in there. The maps are clear, just really interesting to browse through. I've spent the last week or so looking mainly at the European section, but I'm certainly going to explore other parts of the world, and hopefully it'll inspire me to go a bit further afield in the years to come. So thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Chris. And thank you, Tom. And hopefully you'll have a good, adventurous summer of 2021 despite COVID.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Tom, do you want to say thank you again? Because you are muted.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, I just do the best one.
I can't believe I got through the whole call without that happening, and then just let my guard down right at the end.